Hey, I'm Kyla, and since becoming a mom, I struggled with mental illness and just feeling so depleted. That was 9 years ago. And then I realized that so many moms are just like I was. I finally reclaimed my health holistically, and I want to teach you how to do the same. Whether you're newly postpartum or a few years in, this podcast is for you. It's time to recover your health so that you can show up as the mom that you deeply desire to be. This is the Healthy Postpartum Mama podcast. Let's learn and heal together. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Healthy Postpartum Mama podcast. I'm your host, Kyla Lawson. I'm the owner and founder of Elephant Baby, where we support moms in their first few years postpartum. I've also been known as your postpartum vitality coach because for years I've been helping mothers to reclaim their health holistically so that they could show up to be the moms that they desire to be. Welcome to the podcast, everyone. Today I have a very special guest. It's our first guest on the show today. I'm really excited about this conversation. This is my husband, Charles, y'all.
Hello.
So I'm not going to call you Charles. We're going to call you Chuck because that's what we call him. I call him anyway. So we're going to keep it very informal here. I have not normally when I do any type of interviews, I have like questions prepared, prompts. Today is going to be very casual, go with the flow, ain't no telling what's going to come out of our mouths today. But the goal is to encourage our listeners. So grab a nourishing beverage. Today I'm drinking coffee. It's not the most nourishing thing, but hey, it is what it is. It's that type of morning. And then grab your partners, grab your spouse, your boyfriend, whoever, grab your partner so that they can join in and listen to this conversation today, especially if you are feeling you're feeling some type of way about your partner, you're feeling any resentment. If you feel like there's been any lack of intimacy in your relationship since you've entered your postpartum journey, grab your partner because this conversation is going to be real. It's going to be raw. We're going to be transparent. Are you ready?
Are you ready?
Okay, so Chuck, why don't you tell the people a little bit about yourself?
My name's Chuck. As you stated, I'm Kyla's husband, father of 5, CEO of Elephant Baby.
He wished.
Been a fireman for 4 years. That's just about it.
All right. Good. Every time that I give you guys a podcast recording, I always try to outline my 7 pillars of postpartum wellness. If you're not familiar with the 7 pillars of postpartum wellness, I encourage you to go to my YouTube channel. Maybe you're listening on YouTube, but on my YouTube channel, I've outlined all the 7 pillars of postpartum wellness that I believe are crucial and critical for moms to really acknowledge in order for them to thrive in their postpartum journeys. So today's pillar of wellness probably would fall under the category of tending to your soul. And I titled this podcast episode, I Resent My Partner, because quite frankly, that's what a lot of mothers go through in their postpartum journeys. We have our babies, we start having kids, and I know that was my experience. This is something that I've actually had to wrestle with since the beginning of our time that we started having kids. And then also, honestly, really, since we got married 12 years ago. Our oldest is 10 years old. So we've been parents now. I like to include pregnancy in my parenting journey. So we've been parents for over 10 years now. Our youngest is almost 4 and we have 3 in between. And like Chuck mentioned, he's a firefighter. You know, I'm growing a business. I am the CEO of the business. Let's just be clear there. But we have a lot going on. And so I kind of just want to, like I said, just very casual conversation. And we try to help the people out. We're not marriage or parenting gurus. This is just stuff that we've learned along the way, really observing, just some of the challenges and hurdles that we've gotten through. And we want to do that in order to give you guys insight on how to work through certain things. So let's just start with what resentment is. Like, I pulled up Merriam-Webster. I'm going to read this off of my phone, but the definition of resentment is a feeling of indignant displeasure or persistent ill will at something regarded as a wrong, insult, or injury. That's a pretty intense definition. I mean, it aligns with how I felt often in my multiple postpartum journeys. And even now, our youngest is almost 4. And I think it's important to acknowledge that we have people who are listening in who are pregnant and planning for postpartum. They may be newly postpartum, or they're further along in their postpartum journeys, and I fall into that category. So I guess I'll start with a question of, why do you feel that mothers might feel resentful of their partners and their postpartum journeys?
I would say, really, I think it might be a lack of preparation between the couple for postpartum, and in regards to miscommunications, lack of communication. But I think that would be really the top 3 in my experience.
Okay. So you said lack of preparation, lack of communication, and then what was the other one?
Miscommunications.
Miscommunication, and then lack of communication. So I'm just going to get into it. I remember, and not even just after we had Chucky, but I would say all throughout our parenting journey, a lot of times feeling like the load was unequal. Like when it came to parenting and the things of the home, I just always felt that I carried more of a load than you did. And so I think, centering my voice here as a mother, and this is who our audience is, I think that a lot of women could probably resonate with how I felt, and how sometimes I even feel, just feeling like there's an unequal weight in parenting. I know it's been over 10 years ago, but let's think back on when we first started having kids. What did you recognize about just the load of parenting? Like, did you feel at the time that you were pulling equal weight, like that you were doing things, some of the same things that I was doing? Like, what was your perspective when we first started having kids?
I think when we first started having kids, that we agreed that we weren't going to put our kids in daycare. So I think that was a check mark on our preparation end, our check mark on our communication end. So we established that throughout your pregnancy. I think another thing is, possibly after the first child, it was easier for me to be more involved because we were bottle feeding. So that created an opportunity for me to be more involved. But just based off of me having to work every day and you being home, you did assume most of the responsibilities throughout the day. There's just no way around that. But I think throughout the first postpartum, there weren't any checkups. I think, I was really settled into what we agreed on, and, just pushing through that. It's really a lot that can be said that probably could take this whole episode, but we can.
I get what you're saying though. So after we had our first, I was working, and we had both agreed that I was going to stop working and that I was going to stay at home. But like Chuck mentioned, we did not really, like, that was our original plan. And when certain things started to shift, or I started feeling some type of way, like there was never an opportunity to really reevaluate what we had originally said, what we wanted our household to look like. So I think that comes in with lack of communication that you spoke about. I would say that I do feel as though that with the more children that we had, it just brought upon different issues. So I almost look at each of my postpartum journeys as seasons of our life. And, various seasons were just different. Like I remember after we had our first, it wasn't as hard. Like after we had our second, there was a whole nother season, because at that point I had started experiencing depression. I had never experienced depression before. Do you remember what that was like that change in dynamic? So I think it's important to just, first off, before we move on to the next point, to point out that there were some things that were going unaddressed after we had our first. And then we had our second so soon after having our first. So I found out I was pregnant with our second 6 months after we had our first. I was very disappointed. I was not ready at that time. I was on birth control. So it was unexpected. And that was, I feel like, what ushered in my depression. So not only have we not addressed changes that were happening even within the first 6 months of us having our first, now we throw in a whole nother dynamic because we're having another baby and now I'm depressed. So do you remember what that time was like?
I do remember you being depressed. The mood of the household was very gloomy. It was really just a go through the motions routine type of lifestyle. We did stuff because we had to. There was little joy.
Mm-hmm.
There were spurts of happiness, but it was little joy in the house. I think we both enjoyed the kids. We had great relationships with them, but it was definitely some space between us, which we just kept on going every day without addressing anything. I think even when little things got brought up to address, we addressed it out of, I'm not gonna say spitefulness, but it definitely wasn't 100% heart sacrifice with what we were doing for each other.
So at that time, I remember when Chuck would go away for work, I would intentionally go to sleep just to make the time pass. And then I remember when sometimes I would get up and try to, clean the home or do something within the home just to make it seem like I did something for the day. And then some days I just didn't. And he would walk in and the house would be a mess. And this was also towards the beginning of our marriage. He wanted to be active in things outside of the home, like basketball leagues, softball leagues. There was some point in time where you were wanting to play football. Was it professional football too? Or
I was just semi-pro.
Oh, semi-pro football. And I was like, I remember that being a huge point of resentment. 100% of my focus is on these children and this home. And I'm struggling with my mental health. I'm struggling to do everyday tasks. And I was resentful over the fact that you would get up and go and, play basketball, or, that you were even thinking about starting semi-pro football, just because, first off, I didn't have that freedom. I felt like I didn't have that freedom, even though I do remember you always encouraging me to get out the house, but it was so difficult for me to just pull myself away from the home. But I remember feeling very resentful towards the fact, like, this man could just get up and he could just get up and go. And then also too, when you would get off of work, it was almost this expectation of me being excited for you being home, and me, like Chuck said, like the tone of our home was very gloomy because I essentially dictated what the mood of our home was. And so even that in of itself was a very heavy weight to carry. If I was down, then it was almost like everybody in the home was down. And so if we're reflecting back on just specifically those points, because I know a lot of moms feel like I felt, it's hard for us to pull away from our homes, and our partners they go as they please. Am I right? Am I in the way that I perceive that time? Is that something, like, what were you thinking during that time? You wanting to go play basketball, you want to do all these things outside of the home, and I'm barely hanging on by a thread trying to keep up with what's going on within our home.
Well, I think first and foremost within that, it's kind of hard to paint a clear picture of what was going on. Mm-hmm. It wasn't like I was just a jerk and just left her. When I would go to my league games and stuff, I would take the kids.
Yeah.
The thing is one, my generation or whatever, coming up, we weren't really educated in mental health and things like that. And then also coming up in the church, there was that as a whole different skewed definition of what's going on. But so it wasn't really anything that I thought that I had to address or provide any kind of treatment or whatever. My thing was, she's stressed out, she's crying, I'll take, make sure she got something to eat, take the kids, be gone for some hours. Yeah. And that she should be good when I get back.
Yeah. And I wasn't.
So that was definitely an attempt. I think, as men, as fathers, we kind of tend to have a little bit more freedom. I think that, I think that with every situation is different because, like I said, with our first one, we bottle fed. So I actually spent more time with him away from the home than the other ones because they were nursing. So I think, if you can have that opportunity, definitely communicate about it, prepare for it. I mean, that falls upon the communication and preparation.
Preparation, yeah. So I want to just mention the fact, because you mentioned that you weren't a jerk, and you weren't a jerk. And then, even with me talking to some of my friends and really observing, even working with mothers, if I had to compare, which I hate to compare, I do feel as though that you naturally kind of, like you said, you would prepare me meals, you would take the kids. A lot of moms don't even have that. So I want to ask, do you feel that that's why is it that, and I know you can only speak for yourself, but why is it that so many men just don't step up even in the way that you stepped up? And then for, like I said, for me, even what you were giving me was not enough. But I think that kind of points to our lack of a village, even though at the time his parents were taking the kids very frequently. My parents were involved, so we had the support, but it just still sometimes, those days, I remember them being so long and just me feeling so lonely. And there was a lot that I was just dealing with mentally, emotionally. But where did you learn? Because I feel like it came naturally, some of this stuff, Chuck, before we got married, we had the conversation of, were we going to take on traditional roles? How traditional would those roles be? We would literally ask each other questions who would be the one to take out the trash? Who's responsible for meals? We were asking those questions before we got married. And when we started having kids, there were just some questions that we didn't even anticipate to ask or talk about.
Right.
But why do you feel that you were more why are men not stepping up in the way that you stepped up for me? Making sure that I have food on the table, making sure that you're grabbing the kids when you are, going to play basketball or whatever. What's causing that dynamic within our society today?
I think really I don't have any formal education on this. All mine is just, I do a little reading here and there.
It don't have to be formal. Just speak from your experience.
But I think what I've observed and, understood, there's 4 kinds of men. You have men who are they're family driven. They want to have families. They want to have kids. They want to be there to support and uplift their family in every kind of way. You have family tolerant men who is the attitude is, if it happens, it happens. I'll do what I got to do. You have responsibility driven men who are going to handle their responsibilities if they have a family. And then you just have intolerant men to where, they'll go to work and then they'll come home and they're shut off from everything else. And sometimes, everybody experiences a little bit of that all at the same time. But for me, I was really, I've always been family driven. I wanted to be a young father. I wanted multiple children. I felt as though that we had conversations about that, and really, it would have been really unfair and hypocritical of me to not pour into my family the way that I have. Based off of those conversations there, it's hey, I want this. Can we get on the same page with this? Can you give me this? And she gave me kids. So it'll be unfair for me to withdraw and, not handle not only responsibilities of being head of household, parenting, working, things like that, but addressing just needs and wants.
Yeah.
And I think really what all boils down, like I said, earlier, it's just, the lack of education with certain things. Although we did have a village, my parents got our kids at least 2 times a month.
Yeah.
And, looking back, had I had the proper education, the proper understanding of what was really going on in the house, we definitely could have addressed so much.
So let's talk about that, because I feel like that might be something that people need to hear. Like, what education is needed to handle, you said, that situation? Are you referencing, just a situation where mom is experiencing depression or anxiety or some other mood disorder? Is that what you're referencing?
That, along with just building up your relationship, building up each other, just have those tough conversations.
Okay.
We did at that time, we didn't have a productive conversation about you being depressed and the state of mind that you were in.
Yeah.
It was really reactionary on my part. And so that's what I mean when I say that.
Yeah. So let's talk about some ways, like, if we could go back. I mean, we've learned so much along the way. And I feel like with every child that we've had, I do feel like the dynamic of our marriage has gotten better. The dynamic of our household has gotten better. Yeah. I mean, even within the last couple of years, I just feel like we're in a good rhythm. We are in a season where we're shifting. The last few years have been rough. You've been in medic school. I'm in the midst of building a business. Our children are still young. So we have learned a lot. So let's talk about, when we talk about planning and preparation, what goes into that? Why don't you speak from a male perspective, and I'll speak from the perspective as a woman, but what do men need to prepare for going into, before you even have kids, or maybe you're thinking about having another child, what conversations need to be had? How can you tangibly prepare for the postpartum time?
I think that preparation for men during the postpartum time is really preparing to do more work. And that is literal, physical work. Honestly, a lot of people walk around with a mentality, an idea that relationships are supposed to be 50-50 or 100-100. People are, but really during this time, that really can't be possible. Because we don't have the correct understanding of giving birth. I think, that's something that we don't take the time to educate ourselves on. Really, because it really has nothing to do with us. I would say that. But if you sit down and you understand actually, what the woman's body is doing, what is the stress that it's going through, not only during that labor period, but just throughout the whole pregnancy. I think it would definitely encourage you to be willing to pick up the slack. And really, it's not really picking up the slack, because responsibilities, they're offset but they're equal. Our responsibilities become different. But I think that's the number one thing that I think you have to prepare to do more work. You have to prepare yourself to be more emotionally available.
That's a big one.
I think that we can tend to be really relaxed, not necessarily standoffish, but that work would definitely start during pregnancy. It's not going to be something that you can just turn on. I think those are the top two things that being prepared as men, new fathers, fathers of multiples, because you got to divvy up, so you got to divvy up yourself around, but everybody deserves 100%.
Yeah. So I love that you say that, because obviously this is what we talk about on the podcast a lot, is just the mother's need to rest, specifically in those first few weeks postpartum. So there really has to be a shift in mindset as a society as a whole. I feel like we always talk about just the snapback culture and how moms are responsible for so much after we've just brought life into the world, how some of us have to go back to work, or some of us have to pick up our duties within the household because our partners are gone, they're working or whatever. And so really, I think it's so important, just what you said, like it starts as early as you can possibly, like if you think if you know you're interested in having kids, that these conversations need to be had as soon as your partner becomes pregnant, educating yourself about what's going on with her body, what potentially could you guys face during the postpartum time, educating yourselves about postpartum mood and anxiety disorders, really getting an understanding. And from the perspective of a woman, like a lot of times I felt, or I feel like I led in the conversations or the desire to just like, I'm a learner. That's just who I naturally am. And if you have a partner who's a learner, I mean, that's great. But so a lot of times within our dynamic as husband and wife, me entering the postpartum time, when it comes down to parenting, I'm educating myself, how does the brain of a child work and things like that. So I'm just a learner. So I think from a woman's perspective, I may speak for all women that it would just be very appreciative if men were to take it upon themselves to really just learn about the potential issues, learn about what postpartum is like, learn about like what it looks like in different cultures, because the way that we're doing it here in our modern society in America, it ain't it. Like we're experiencing postpartum mood and anxiety disorders like never before. We're experiencing chronic health issues, and immediately postpartum, it sets us up for long-term health. So I talk about this all the time. This is something that Chuck he's had to live with, but my ups and downs with postpartum depression, like I felt like when I first had it after my second, it never fully went away. Like I feel like it was something, depression and being depleted, being exhausted, overwhelmed, stressed. These were things that I've dealt with for years. So really, I think it's so important for our partners to step up and to create the environment for mothers to thrive within our household. And I think what that looks like tangibly is like just exactly what you said, like anticipating needing to pick up more work, preparing, if you're way in advance, if you know that your partner, they work a full-time job, making sure that your partner can have some time off of work so that they can be more in tune with the household. And if that's an impossible situation, coordinating help for your wife so that they can, even if you're away from the home, that they're not feeling lonely or they're not feeling like their responsibility load is so high. One thing that you mentioned was being emotionally available. I want to talk about that a little bit more. What does that mean? Like,
I think that means, it means different things for different situations. If everybody had it the way that they'd have it, they'd have that help. They'd have that 6 months off of work and, things like that. But the honest truth is, some people don't have that. Some people do have to have babies and
a lot of people
get back to it. I just think, in that situation, it's, just understanding that, certain things can happen. I think understanding that, you want to be this for the mother of your child, but you can't make that happen right now. So they'll have check-in conversations, being more conversationally available, initiating.
Sorry, I'm going to ask you, what would those check-in conversations look like?
I mean, I think they should look like, just acknowledging the state of whatever's going on, whatever state you guys are in. Acknowledge what's going on.
I'll chime in here too, just like asking intentional questions of like, what would some of those intentional questions be if you're, let's say that, you schedule like, let's check in with one another once a week. And I would say be very intentional about this. Don't just like choose a day, choose a time, this is our check-in time. We're going to make sure if our emotional needs are being met, spiritual, physical, and mental needs, well, I just answered the question right there. But what could some of those questions look like during the check-in time?
Really, I think those questions, they can look like, do you need anything specific? How are you feeling physically? What can I do? What can I do to support you in this area, support you in that area? Would you feel all right if I took the kid? How would you use this time? If I take the kids, so and so for a couple of hours, or just things like that. Really, what do you need? I think we've gotten off into this state of mind where we believe that our partners should be able to assume and guess, should be able to read our minds, which I don't think is fair. I think maybe some things or whatever you should pick up on after you've been together for a while. But I think really, I think those questions should be valid questions. I don't think that those questions should be frowned upon if they're intentionally asked. Seeking to provide just a solution to whatever's going on in the moment. I think that's first. I think that's first and foremost, definitely upping the communication in those instances.
I agree. And then I would also too just note that, sometimes it can feel difficult, and I think maybe this will be another podcast episode, but during specifically the first few weeks postpartum, it's so important to center the care of the mother.
Right.
And I know with us and our experiences, I don't feel that you put a lot of attention on yourself. Like I remember after I had a couple, so this maybe was after Carson or Cannon, I can't remember, but I am educating myself about, now I am aware of what the postpartum, this was after, I can't remember who this was after, y'all, but there was one point in time where, I had learned what postpartum should look like for myself. So then now I'm communicating to you, I need these soups prepared. This is what I need for my postpartum journey. And Chuck was just so willing. I remember I gave you the recipes and he prepared all of these soups and we stuck them in the freezer. And during postpartum, he would warm up the soups for me. There was such a lack of self. Like, it was an acknowledgement that during this time, it really is about my needs and my recovery. There was not very much mention. I don't think we ever really had the issue of you pressuring me into sex or any of that. Just the acknowledgement. I think that's one thing that we need to really acknowledge when we're coming into the postpartum time is, sorry, fellas, but really, y'all got to be put on the back burner, because if we do not care for mothers in the way that they need to be cared for, especially within those first few weeks, then it really sets the tone and the dynamic for the months and years to come. And so I think with having that mindset, like, I'm going to love on the mother of my child, I'm really going to care for her during this time. Kind of like Chuck, you mentioned, it's not going to be 50-50 all the time, or some people say you should give it 100. No, like during postpartum, fathers really have to step in to do more so that mothers can really lean into their femininity and resting and recovering for their well-being. And each of you knowing that this is just going to be for a short season. But I do kind of want to touch on, from the male perspective, do you feel that men sometimes may feel like that they're being neglected in those first few weeks postpartum? Is that something that you felt during any of our experiences?
I think, yeah. I think it's a unnatural feeling.
Yeah.
I think that ties into just your lack of, if you don't prepare and communicate about certain things, beginning, we really didn't prepare or communicate about anything. We really just attacked the days, day by day. We were definitely, 6-week checkup, 6 weeks you can have sex again, and
yeah,
things
Shoot,
like that.
We did it before after we had Chucky. Bad decision.
we but having those conversations, you can already kind of have that expectation there. And really it's just about just having a mental fortitude as a man to know that you have to sacrifice parts of yourself, for the good and the well-being of the family, really. I mean, really, is don't let that be your driving factor to love your wife or what have you. You're still doing what you're doing because you want her to be the best version of her at the end of the day. Because really, you get the best version of her. That's who you get to spend your time with.
I think I look back on like when we first got married, and I remember feeling like I had to fight for myself. There was nobody else fighting for me. Like, I had to fight for myself. I'm a person who's just very vocal. And so some people that's off-putting, but because of certain traumas and things that I experienced before we got married, it was just always the need for me to make sure that, and I still feel that way. I'm a little bit more reserved when it comes to our marriage, but I think that a lot of the mentality in which we struggled was, we were just looking after ourselves because we hadn't proved to each other that we could look after each other, really. But I think it's just a beautiful harmony to trust and know the fact that your partner, your spouse, they truly have, if both of us, if each of us has the mentality that we have the best intent for our significant other, like we want the very best for them. If we think like that, if we're operating like that, then it automatically leads to the care that we need. I don't know if I'm making sense, but it's almost like if I'm only focused on what my needs are, then it just opens up the potential for your needs to be neglected. And then maybe you feel like you have to fend for yourself. The beauty in a marriage, the beauty in a partnership, the beauty in a relationship is recognizing and acting and choosing, I'm going to do what's best for not myself, but I'm going to do what's best for my significant other. And if both of us have that mentality, then our needs are going to be met. You're going to be helping to meet my needs. I'm going to be helping to meet your needs. And I would say during those check-in conversations, it's important too, from us as mothers, to hear how our partners, to hear how you guys are feeling throughout this whole transition period as well. So while the focus really for especially those immediate weeks postpartum is healing and recovery for the mother, it is important to ask those same questions, like, how are you feeling? What are your needs? Like what's going on with you emotionally? And then also being willing to just shift and compromise in order just to bring balance and harmony and intimacy within the relationship.
Right.
So I kind of want to move on. I know this is kind of a longer episode, but hopefully we're gleaning insight, because we've talked a lot about like what it's like for parents who are newly postpartum to transition. But what do we say to the couples who are listening in right now and they're a little bit further into their postpartum journey and they're really feeling that resentment, that they're really feeling like, and this is something I've experienced as well. We talk about the unequal load of parenthood. Like sometimes I have felt like and do feel like why should nobody had to tell me to learn about the development of my children in order to be the best mom that I could be. And sometimes the resentment came in having to communicate these things to you. I know that you mentioned how, you can't read minds and things like that. But I feel like this is the dynamic for so many households where it's just, we're the default parent. Mothers are the default parent. Our kids come to us for everything. We're responsible for managing the home. Some women are working outside of the home on top of trying to maintain their home. And again, some men go as they please. They have their other things going on. So let's talk about that. Like, how do we overcome the challenge of mothers being the default parent? First off, do you feel like a lot of times, let's keep it real with our relationship. Do you feel like that was the case? Do you feel like that was the case for us? Like when the term the default parent, like do you feel like there was a default parent in our
So this is really where for lack of a better word, the unfairness for me kicks in, because I believe naturally you are the default parent. You carry a baby, you build a baby for 9 months, and you push your baby out. And where does the baby go after the baby comes out? Immediately to the mother, right? So you get that, and then you have nursing. You're nursing, so that baby builds a connection with you. However long you choose to nurse a child, and the baby knows they come to me for. I mean, this is within our journey. The baby comes to me for fun, but when the baby starts crying, the baby's ready to eat. Gotta go back to mom. So it's like, hey, this is where I have to go for my needs to be met, and that's the mentality that they have as they grow up. Even today, even not necessarily today, but I see it as my kids are older, and she's upset because my children will walk right past me and go ask her for something. And it's like, it's like once you go ask your dad, he's sitting right there.
Sitting right there.
But it's not necessarily a bad thing. I think that what it is it's just a way of life that they've grown to understand. In regards to combating that or whatever, what I try to do is I'll say, hey, because it's a little bit of extra sprinkle for us because I'm gone for work, and so I'll come home and I'll have to say, hey, don't go ask your mom for anything. If you got any questions, come to me. But I think that has really been, that's something that we deal with today. We talk about, we struggle through, not really, and for me is, I don't want to invalidate her feelings because, her feelings are 100% true. She's the default parent. But, at the same time, I think that, we really don't look at, what mothers have to do for children to create that bond or, the reason for that, if you look at different relationships, if let's say you have a mother and a father and bottle fed, and if they're formula fed, but the mother's working every day, and the father's bottle feeding every day, this, that, and the other, 9 times out of 10 their father will be the default parent.
But like if the parent, so that's interesting because that's kind of what I was thinking about this as you're talking. First off, like I love that recognition of the fact that, from birth, infancy, that parent, I don't think I ever, like, as long as we've been married, I don't think I've ever heard you say it like that. And I don't think I've ever acknowledged that. So I think that's a very beautiful thing to acknowledge. But, you're kind of mentioning, the different dynamic, like if mom were the working out of the home, if dad were stay at home. And I think honestly, that's probably why you are the way that you are. Maybe I don't want to speak for you, but what I know and knew and recognized from Chuck's dad was that he just was very involved domestically within your household. So do you feel like that plays a part in just the way that fathers father their children and mothers mother their children, the way that we grow up and what we see?
Yeah, I think 100%. Because either you want to be like it and be better than it, or you don't want to be like it at all.
Yeah,
so that's what it comes down to.
And that's exactly what it was for us. I mean, even within our marriage, within our parenting journey, we had these views of, what we saw growing up. And there were these conversations of what we don't want to be like or what we do want to be like. And then sometimes even just adopting the ways of our parents. And then that was a big struggle. Just he saw his parents operate a certain way. So because he liked that, then he wanted me to fall into what they did growing up. And then, on the opposite end of the spectrum, same thing for me. Like, because of what I experienced growing up, I wanted him to fall into, it just shaped the way that we viewed not only parenthood, but also our marriage and the dynamic of our relationship. So I think it's so important as couples, as mothers, as fathers, that we just almost like no expectations of how the other person should be, but really just forming and shaping, what do we want for our household? What do we want for our family dynamic? What do we want for our marriage, for our relationship? What do we want for our children? Really just having conversations to shape like what that's going to look like, and constantly having those conversations, because like you mentioned, things often change, often shift. We might say something in one season, and then if we're trying to continue that thing when we need to change according to where we are, then it could cause issues. I think the disconnection is there because we are not super adamant about intentionally working towards what we want our family to be like. And so as mothers, it's so important for us to be able to communicate our needs. A lot of times the resentment is there, but we're not speaking up, we're not communicating. That's kind of what you talked about, the lack of communication or maybe miscommunication. We're not sharing and being vocal about what we want this thing to look like.
Right.
And then I know for me, it was like, well, I shouldn't have to. Like, nobody had to like tell me to be a certain way. Why do I have to do this? But at the end of the day, it's really not beneficial if we are not speaking up.
Especially on the back end, if you get into it without planning and you have all these feelings, the best thing you can do for your partner is to give them an opportunity to not necessarily correct it, but an opportunity to, just make progressive steps forward.
Yeah.
And that's on both. That's coming from,
yeah,
husband and wife.
yeah.
So I think that's it's not fair to hold things in without fully disclosing.
Yeah. That's something that I feel like that we've struggled with on both sides. I hold things in. Yes, you do. You have held things in, because I remember specifically saying, like, when you don't communicate to me what you need, it gives me.
Okay, yeah, I'm guilty.
It doesn't give me the opportunity. Like, when we communicate and when we share what our needs are, it gives the opportunity for us to be ministered to. It gives us the opportunity to pour into our relationships. And I can almost, something in my head is telling me, well, what if you are, some people might be thinking, well, what if we are sharing with our spouses what they need and they're just not changing, or, they're not, or it's taking forever for them. Like, what do you say to that? What do you say to the person who says, I'm sharing what my needs are, they just ain't doing, like, they're just not changing? Like, what do you say to that person?
I mean, really, you got to show love and grace. As hard as it is for us to do that in that moment, in that season, especially when we're not getting things that we feel as though we need. But you really just show love in your relationship, and then evaluate your relationship. Have a conversation after conversation, and you see where you're lacking, and it might lead to relationship counseling and things like that. This thing ain't gonna be perfect, because we're all imperfect individuals and selfish in ways, and things like that. But I mean, really, I just pray that you just pray that you're tied with a partner that wants the best for you, the best for the family, and just seek to be better. Really,
Yeah.
It's definitely hard. I think, really, like I said in the beginning, those 4 aspects of men, we've, everybody's a little bit in some point along this journey. I can see where, being the family tied into man has really elevated my family. And there were times where I don't think I've ever been just solely responsibility oriented, but I've been family tolerant at times.
Yeah.
And that changes the dynamic of the household.
Mm-hmm.
But, you have to have a partner that, not afraid to have conversations, and you have to be open to have conversations.
Yeah. And I would say, I mean, if you're struggling with just being open with your partner and having those conversations, kind of like what you said, take it upon yourself. Like you recognize that, oh, I'm struggling with this. Take it upon yourself to do the work to unpack and figure out, why am I struggling with vulnerability or opening up or sharing with my partner what they need? And then take it one step further. If you can't unpack it and if you can't change and if that's something that you want to do, then that's where you would want to maybe seek out therapy or counseling or opening up to somebody else who might be able to guide you in the right way. But I know this podcast episode went a little bit long, so we do want to wrap up. Maybe we'll continue with a part 2. I do want to encourage you guys, especially if you're watching on YouTube, we'll be in the comments, just willing and open to answer any specific questions that you might have about your specific family dynamic and what's going on in your household. So we'll be keeping an eye out for comments just to make sure that we're available to you guys to just answer any questions and support you in any way that we can. But we're gonna wrap it up. So we said a lot. So I do want to just maybe if we can just end with 2 takeaways. You give a takeaway, I give a takeaway. Specifically for couples who are in the position where they're resenting their partner. Like what can they do today? When they get done with listening with this episode, what can they do today to begin to turn things around?
I would say that preparation is not too late. Even if you're in it, you can still prepare for what you want the rest of this time to look like.
Yeah, I love that.
And when I say time, I mean, don't put a timestamp on it. Get you a notebook, some paper, and communicate that way. That'd be mine.
Yeah. So my takeaway would be to take it one step further, real intentionality, like write down together, like what do we want I feel like when in seasons where we're doing that, where we're just putting it on paper, what do we want our family to look like? Emotionally, physically, mentally, spiritually, like what do we want this to look like? That might be the first step. What do we want it to look like? And then maybe listing 2 or 3 points underneath those categories to really draw out what needs to happen in order for us to get to where we want to be.
Sure.
That would be what my advice would be. But thank you guys so much for tuning in. Like I said, if you have any questions, head over to the YouTube channel, drop your questions below, and we'll be looking out to just answer any questions that you guys may have. If you're looking for any advice, we're open to giving it. But thank you, babe, for joining me on this episode. I know this is is this out of your comfort zone or this is completely out of his element? But hey, I appreciate you for doing this. Let me know if it was valuable to you, and we'll see you guys on the next episode. Bye.